My name is Jonatan Almfjord, and this is In-Depth Conversations. Today we're having the pleasure of welcoming Associate Professor and Director of Studies at the Department of Psychology at Lund University, Simon Granér.
Thank you very much.
Very much welcome to this episode of In-Depth Conversations. Simon, you and I have met before. You seem like a very decent person, so it will be
you should ask my children. They are of a different opinion.
Okay. It will be fun to have this kind of discussion with you, rather than you just being the teacher and I'm being the student. Let's see, maybe I will change my mind. But anyway, so you are working here at Lund University, of course, and you are doing some research on different topics, performance, rehabilitation, sports, and you have done some previous work in police and military. And you mentioned music as well, performance in music as well. So could you tell us briefly about your background? Did you always want to become a scientist, a researcher? Was that the number one goal in life?
I grew up in Lund with academic parents, and I told my father once at dinner that I was not going to study at university, and he just laughed at me and said, "Yes, you are. Yes, you are." And just now in I guess a couple of weeks or month, we will have our second edition of our book, me and my father, and that my sister is doing the illustrations for. So I became my father pretty much.
That's cool. So are you and your father authoring the book?
We're authoring the book, so it's a book that he wrote a long time ago, and that I have contributed 2 new chapters. So one new chapter for this edition, and one new chapter for the last edition.
Okay, cool. I like
so and then I growing up in Lund, playing sports and starting to get interested in the kind of the mechanics, the psychological mechanics or the sociological mechanics of sports. Not very interested in watching sports, but thinking about sports and playing and doing sports has been my let's say entry into the academic field. So you could call me something of a pracademic, something like a practical academic. I enjoy thinking about how to convert academic thoughts, theories, research results into practical, practical things. How to develop practice for athletes, for example, from a theoretical perspective.
Right.
Something I think that the sports world lacks.
So maybe something like you prefer research and science that can be practically applied rather than just existing in this theoretical cloud of nonsense.
Well, I mean, we never know what's nonsense and what's not. We never know what's basic research, what will develop into something. So there's a role of the basic research, the things that we don't know really what to do with, because we can't predict in the future what's going to be important findings in I guess every discipline, from the quarks of physics to whatever personality or emotions is in psychology.
Right. So let's dive deeper into sports. So when I was considering what questions I would ask you, I got this stupid question in my mind, and then I thought, well, let's pose this question and then we can develop further better questions during the way. So like, I don't play much sports now. I did when I was younger, but when I consider the in my terms psychology of sports, then I think like, well, the World Cup in football, okay, I watch on the telly, I watch them run around, muscular dudes. They can't be thinking very much. they are just moving their bodies? And that's a stupid question. But let's go from there. Why should I care about psychological research in sports?
You probably have a brain because you need to move.
Right.
So organisms that doesn't need to move, they don't have a brain. Like a tree doesn't have a brain. You have a big brain, so you're probably designed to move, and you need to move in order to do all the basic things of being a living organism, feed, reproduce, defend yourself or run away or something like that. So your brain is probably developed to move, and the way we look at well-being and a lot of cognitive processes are due to some kind of movement, right? You feel better if you exercise, for example, and sometimes, I mean, and you say the people in the players of the World Cup, the football players, they don't run around and thinking. Yeah, they do, but there's also other cognitive processes that goes on that they might not be aware of. Why they make certain decisions, or why they become really angry, or why they yell at the referee, or stuff like that. So there's a lot of interesting processes that are involved in sports. Thinking, the conscious thinking part is just, I guess, one of them, but there are more.
Yeah. So give me one or two of your favorite examples. Like here's a fictional football player. What's the most interesting aspect of his or her performance, in your opinion?
I mean, performing under extreme pressure is one of them, I guess. So World Cup final, 1-1 full time, 1-1 after what do you call it, penalty time.
Yeah.
And we have penalties, and so what are these athletes thinking? Probably having the most important performance of their lives. And we have documented cases of athletes being traumatized by missing penalty shots in the World Cup, for example. Latest when England played, for example, I guess that was the Euro Cup, some of their really young players missed their shots that they would make, I don't know, 99 out of 100 in practice, but in games it's a different situation. So what happens with an athlete who is doing something extremely important? What are they thinking? How are they feeling? How are their body reacting? Because it's, as you say, it's not only a thinking process, it's also a bodily process. Their body and mind probably think that they're under extreme pressure, threatened, for serious harm. So I mean, there's a lot of interesting things going on there. And so your question was what is important here, and I think another thing that is important if you back up is how did they learn those skills so that they could perform on a World Cup stage, shooting the penalty. Something in their practice led them to those skills, and I think that is really interesting. How do we teach children to do sports? How do we teach students to learn things at university? There's a connection there. So the pedagogic aspect of sport, I think, it's more relevant for most people. I guess hardly anybody gets to shoot a penalty shot, but most people get to perform on some kind of stage. If it's music, if it's public speaking, if it's getting their driver's license, if it's threatening situation, if it's an accident or something like that. So most people at some point in their life do some kind of performance that means something to them, or I guess all people. You have to hide in your room to not experience some kind of pressure or stress, I guess. So
yeah, sure.
so those things kind of are connected, how you perform under pressure, how you learn certain skills, and how you react to stress depending on how you learn skills. So I guess that's the main things that I think are interesting. And of course we have other things, motivation, for example. Why do we do things? Why do we decide to learn these skills? We have confidence or self-efficacy. That's also very important aspects. Another thing that I guess it's really I find really interesting in sports is the social aspects, the group dynamics of sports. Why do we want to do this together? Why do we want to play together? How does that make us feel? How does that make us perform? So it's a multifaceted, very complex problem, but it's also really, really important to a lot of people.
Yeah. Okay, so many additional questions. Let's start with, are you at all interested in personality traits? Does it tie in with, you mentioned, for example, self-efficacy.
Yeah.
I could imagine that could be a part.
Yeah.
But is it interesting? Could you, on a group level, pick the most successful players in a football team and the least successful players and see, oh, these have that personality trait and these ones don't, and that makes all the difference? Or I've never heard such a...
So surprisingly a lot, you would think that there is a sport personality, but we haven't found one.
Okay.
So I guess in conscientiousness would be something like important for sports. You need to practice a lot. You need to be, you need to show up for practice. You need to be agreeable. You need to cooperate with coaches and other players. Extroversion, introversion. I haven't seen anything that would indicate that would be a problem. My own experience is that there are very introverted athletes that are on top level of their sports, and there are extroverted players. The extroverted players we tend to like because they do the media thing better, I guess. Right. I guess it comes down to how you deal with your social environment and how you practice. If you are good at showing up for practice every day, you're going to become a better athlete, or you're going to become better at anything you do. So personality has a role. It's connected to your stress. How well you deal with stress. It's connected to how well motivated you are or become. It's connected to your self-confidence or self-efficacy. Sure. And it's connected how you deal with other people, I guess. So in that interaction, personality has a role, but it's not something that we spend a lot of time focusing on in sports psychology, I guess.
I hear you. So it might be an interesting factor sometimes, but it might not be the primary factor of interest.
No.
If you were to analyze a team of football players or whatever.
No, I guess not. It's the interaction between stress tolerance and interaction with peers. I guess where personality becomes interesting.
Right. So let's move into the social aspect. So I had one of those stupid questions, but let's make it another. Do you do like, you probably don't, but do you do like consulting work for sport teams? And I don't know if consulting work is the right term, but I mean, if you do research on a sport team versus on a single athlete, depending on the sport, of course, but football all over.
I don't, but I have colleagues who do.
Right.
What we do consulting wise right now is we consult musicians.
Oh, right.
At the Musikhögskolan, the Lund University Music Conservatory,
Malmö Music,
something like that. I should know the name, but
me too.
I guess
I've studied there.
Yeah. So we do in a collaboration with one of their teachers, a piano teacher. we do a class in psychology, and I have 2 lectures there, and then we do individual consulting with them, and pretty much try to figure out how to deal with the pressure of being a high-level musician. And it's similar to athletes, I guess. They need to perform. They need to perform in a slightly different way. They have a different tradition of practicing. They have a different tradition of dealing with pressure as well, which is interesting. And I think those two. I guess from my perspective, the music industry has a lot to learn from the sports psychology. These were issues that we dealt with. Or dealing with, of course, but have solutions for that I think haven't reached the classical music training or industry quite yet, and that's really interesting work to deal with those performers, because they are in such a special situation.
Yeah.
Needing to perform, finding some kind of perfection, or dealing with their motor skill issues, and their performance and their cognition, and the emotion that comes with performing. They do auditions, and then they do concerts, and it seems like doing the auditions for being part of an orchestra, for example, is one of their main stressors. So not even playing in front of people, playing in front of a jury is a major stressor.
Right. So in that work, is it specifically and exclusively classical music?
Yeah. So
that's a shame.
Yeah. Yeah. It is, I guess.
I'm a bit familiar with the classical part of music, and it's very, I would dare say, conservative in how you practice, in how you voice your instrument, etc., as compared to, rock music or jazz or whatever.
Yeah. And I think the classical music may learn or may borrow things from other areas of music, for example. I believe that if classical musicians would jam like a jazz musician, they would have better skills of dealing with performance anxiety. So the playful element seems to be lacking from classical music, and I can't say it always is or is for everybody, but I think if the classical musicians would adopt a more playful way of practicing, they would be better off in motor skill learning, dealing with their instrument, performing under pressure, and perhaps even be more creative, I guess. I don't know if the jazz musicians or the folk musicians or the rock musicians jam because they want to have a better stress performance skills. They probably jam because it's fun, right?
Yeah.
But then again, pick-up basketball is not because you want to be a better, perform better in an important game. Pick-up basketball or pick-up soccer or football, it's because it's fun, right? But it seems to be really important for performing under pressure. So those kind of playful ways of practicing seems to be the key to develop skills that you can perform even though you are highly stressed or under a lot of pressure. So that's another interesting, I guess, area of that kind of connects these concepts of psychology or sports psychology or performance psychology.
Right. This is a very cool aspect that I didn't quite prepare for in my questions. But since I'm a musician myself, not professional of course, I have some insight in different musical genres, and it totally makes sense what you say. And I don't want to throw out the classical baby with the classical bathwater totally. But I can actually see if I was a high-performing concert pianist, it is totally like crucial that I perform during these like 5 minutes when I'm playing a piano piece at a concert. It's almost more important for me to perform well than, I shouldn't make a comparison with sports performers, but perhaps as a rock rhythm guitarist, for example, then if you play one note wrong, then you go like, oh damn, ha ha ha, and then you move on to the next fret and you play the correct thing, and no one will bat an eye as long as you are looking cool when you do it.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, when the musicians say they play in an orchestra and they do something wrong, most of them say that just drowns in the thing, and they continue playing. Their biggest fear is during auditions, because then it's just them, or then it's them or just one other musician, pianist, for example, or something like that, who helps them perform their audition. And then everything is on them. They have no social support, and they're scrutinized for everything they do, and a job might depend on that little mistake.
Yeah.
And of course, I mean, depending on what sport, of course, in football, you make mistake all the time. But then again, if you make a mistake and the other team scores, you might lose your job, right? You might not play on the national team. You might be scrutinized by the media, or in social media, or by fans. I mean, it's a hard world, right?
Yeah.
Or you might be really mean to yourself. You know, I caused us to lose this game, for example. So there are a lot of parallels between musicians and athletes, and if you do figure skating, if you do one mistake, you fall, and then you're not going to win the gold medal, right? If you're extreme athletes and you ski and you do a mistake, you fall, and then you break your leg, right? Or if you are an MMA fighter and you drop your guard, then you get punched in the face, and that's part of the sport, of course. But people don't want to get punched in the face.
Yeah.
So there are consequences for I guess everybody who's in a high performance situation.
Yeah.
If you're a surgeon at the hospital here and you make a mistake, then, people might die or become injured or something like that.
True.
So this is a problem, I guess, that is very important for a lot of us. Maybe not as a university teacher, but you can do some mistakes. But depending on what kind of environment you are in, a harsh environment, your mistakes have consequences. In a nicer environment, it doesn't.
Yeah.
When we tend to be nervous in the harsh environments, right?
Yeah, of course.
And our anxiety or our nervousness, or whatever we want to call it, doesn't make us better performers. There is no clutch players, so to say. Nobody becomes a better football player in the end of the World Cup final. Everybody becomes worse. Even though we in media want to portray these heroes, but we haven't found them in research. So everybody in measurable ways becomes worse, and this is kind of controversial, because we want our heroes, right? We want the LeBron James or the Messis or Ronaldos to be these superheroes, especially for our country, if we involve country or club team that everybody gets involved with. I don't know, maybe we got away from your question.
It doesn't matter. Isn't there a term for this in the psychological literature? If an athlete has scored from multiple games, then you expect them to score again, and that's probably a myth.
It's.
I don't remember the term, but...
we call it momentum, or you being hot, or something like that.
Right, a hot player.
Yeah. So it's probably a myth, and as a fan, we're really bad at understanding natural variation. So you might score in in a couple of games in a row, and then you have some kind of regression to the mean, and you don't score in 3 or 4 games, and you think you're in a slump, and if you really believe that you're hot, then you might take more chances, for example, that might make you do more stupid things, and not following your instructions from your trainer or coach and stuff like that. So of course there's a lot more psychology than to hot players than just a statistical regression to the mean, where kind of things balance out, and you don't score half a goal every game, of course. So how you think about things, what kind of decisions you make comes into play. So I guess these are all very complex issues.
Yeah.
And difficult to understand, and impossible to understand for most fans or coaches or players, and really hard to understand for all researchers.
Right. I have to ask about one thing that comes to mind. So if we consider this is a guy who plays some sport, and if he does a mistake, he is risking to get a serious injury, like physical injury. This is a guy who's playing music, and when he or she is making a mistake, I imagine it's more of a the person has to realize more cognitively that that note, for example, might have been a mistake. There's not the same physical feedback, is it?
Yeah, no. Well, yeah.
Is that an interesting aspect?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess if you're asking about the athlete who is about to get injured, I don't think, especially young athletes, but healthy athletes are not really concerned about injury that much. Older athletes and injured athletes tend to be.
Yeah.
But one interesting aspect of that, and from a stress perspective, is that being injured doesn't seem to be the worst thing that people worry about. So we don't really worry that much about injury. The thing that we worry about, the thing that stresses us up, is making a mistake in front of people who we care about.
Right.
So I usually say the human's greatest fear, and that it sources to most stress, is not injury or death. It's exclusion from the group.
Right.
If you ask soldiers who've been in battle, they are not fighting in that particular battle when the bullets are flying and there's explosions and there's a real present danger for their well-being or life. They're not that concerned of being injured or dying.
Yeah.
They're concerned of the welfare of the other team. They don't care about the ideology of their particular nation and the geopolitics. That goes out the window real fast.
Yeah.
They are concerned about the group. And I think that this is a mechanism that makes it possible for us to go to war. If we were not able to defend our group or defend our nation or our unit or whatever it is, or willing to die or get injured, we wouldn't have wars, then we wouldn't be human. So it's a bit of a philosophical discussion, I guess, because we're not human without this mechanism. But the athlete is worried about losing. The athlete's about losing for themselves, for the status that they gained or are about to lose. They're also, if they're in a team sport, they're also afraid of losing, that their team is losing, or losing status in front of their own team or in front of their fans and so on. And the musician is doing the same. The musician is not about to get injured, right? But might lose something more important.
Yeah, some prestige.
Their prestige, their social status, their opportunities, and so on. So I guess that they are thinking about the same thing, or evolutionary primed, willing to be part of the group, not excluded, and have high prestige or status. Our ancestors who were included in the group and had high status in the group, they had more resources, they had more food, their children had more food, their children's children had more food, their brothers and sisters' children had more food, and opportunity to have mates or better mates or more mates to put their genes forward in the gene pool. So I think this is really important, and I might not be the question you asked, but we have to look at the individual as a organism, as a biological organism.
Sure.
Right? And that organism has certain mechanisms that makes them survive. Now, we came up with football. Football is not an evolutionary thing. Neither is piano concerts. This is our cultural layer of the biological organism. Sorry, right? So why do we become stressed playing piano or playing football?
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense unless you look at it from an evolutionary perspective.
Yeah.
Right. So and most people are nervous giving a presentation in front of their class. Right? Their class is not going to kill them. They're not going to injure them. They're not missing opportunities. My students' grade doesn't depend on how well they perform during their presentation. Their grades depend on how well they do on the exam, right? I understand that they are nervous for the exam, but why are they so nervous, or even more nervous, speaking in front of other people? Now, and I've seen students so nervous speaking in, not that important courses. And if you get a B or a C or an A in this 5-point course at the Department of Psychology, that's not going to give you this prestigeful job or not. Something else will do that, how well you perform on your interview or other courses you have taken or so on. You understand what I mean?
Yeah.
So why is this little event so salient for our nervousness and anxiety? Well, people are sitting in the audience who I care about and that I want to be a high status individual. I want to be a high status individual in this group, and I want them to think that I'm one of them. And if you look at that, you can understand a lot of stress that is otherwise, reactions to stress that are otherwise designed to keep us safe, raising our shoulders or sweating or tensing up or shaking and stuff like that. It doesn't make sense if you just want to look at the having speech, but it makes sense if it can make sense if you're a boxer or an MMA fighter, somebody's about to punch you, right? It doesn't really make sense if you're a violinist, but it is if you look at it from an biological evolutionary perspective, I guess, or a biopsychological perspective. We're one system in that respect.
Yeah. So does this mean that it matters? I'm considering the discourse, the cooperation between the performing person or many persons and the people watching. I've always been very confused by those, is it called hooligans in English?
yeah.
Crazy fans looking from a distance. And I always considered like the performer is performing for his or herself or the team.
Yeah.
It shouldn't matter what goes on all around. But say if I were to in my case, if I was to play an awesome guitar solo and shred the guitar on a concert, would it make, knowing the research that you do, would it make any difference if I loved every single person in the audience or if I didn't know any person in the audience?
Well, I guess it depends. If you are, it depends on a couple of things. It depends on how good you are and how good you think you are.
Sure.
So how well you can meet the expectations of the audience. Are you really good? Then it's always better to be loved or something like that. I'm going to perform something that I'm really good at, and you're going to love it, right? If I'm not that good, then it's probably better if you have an audience that don't really care.
Yeah, sure.
So I guess the football hooligans, there's a lot of factors into that. If I perform poorly and I know in social media I'm gonna get threatened, for example. I know my family might get threatened. It's not gonna make me a better performer. And a lot of fans, a lot of football fans, think that they can kind of scare people into performance. Performance in football is a complex game. It's a fine motor game. It's a fast-paced, very complex decision-making game. We don't become better at those things under threat. We become worse.
Yeah.
You might become better if you feel that you are appreciated or loved. That's probably a better environment to do these things, and so sometimes I wish that some of the fans would take a couple of courses in psychology, or just realize that being in an environment that is supportive is probably better for your performance than being in a harsh environment where you're threatened or hated or stuff like that, or based on just your performance, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. So I'm very fascinated by this comparison between musicians and sports people. But just a brief venture into the police and military stuff. You mentioned this is not current research. It's research.
It's research that we did a couple of years ago. We had a collaboration with the Swedish Police Academy.
So what was that about? What's the purpose?
So the purpose is pretty much the same as we have discussed. The problem with police officers, especially in high pressure situation, is that they might have to use their firearm. They might have to shoot.
More of a threat, a direct physical threat.
Then they are themselves under a direct physical threat. So we understand that they are stressed. They might not be under direct physical threat, but somebody else probably is. And we look at the cognitive and behavioral aspects of that. And I mean, the statistics of Swedish police officers shooting in real violent situations, the record of them actually shooting and hitting, it's low. So sometimes you see in the media, why don't you just shoot him in the leg? So everybody has tried to shoot a gun from 10 meters under a really high stress. You know, it's not that easy to hit the target that is as big as a thigh or a knee or something like that. It's really, really hard. And so what we thought, and our collaborators within the police force and within the police training system and the police academy, was that there might be a way that they trained that wasn't optimal for aiming and shooting in a live violent situation. Okay. So and the military does the same, and they do it because tradition and cost, for example. They line up, and safety, of course. They line up and they shoot at paper targets, right? And so they say, they have an instructor say, well, you have 2 shots and on your own fire, and the police officers draw their weapon and they aim and they shoot. The problem is that situation never occurs.
Right.
So let's say you're a footballer and your coach lines you up and say, so here are the ball, put it in a fixed position, and here's the goal, and there's the goalie, and on my command, shoot. And we do that for a couple of hours in training, and then we do it for a couple of hours every now and then we expect them to go out and play football. So it doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
You're never totally stable where you stand. It might be dark, it might be a moving target, it might be somebody yelling at you, it might be situations where you don't really know if you're going to shoot or not. Most people do not want to harm other human beings.
Yeah.
We seem to have something that stops us from doing that. It's difficult decision, you know, you're gonna feel bad, you know, you're gonna be scrutinized for this. So and you might end up killing somebody,
yeah,
right?
Of course.
So it's a really high stress situation, and the main way of training for this is lining up and shooting on paper targets. Now, the police have simulation exercises, and they're really, really good, but I guess we should do it the other way around. There should be a lot of simulation exercises and then some live ammo fire on the shooting range. And a lot of more training should go, you know, jamming in jazz. That's the comparison from the musicians, right? So a simulation where you as a kid played cops and robbers, right?
Yeah.
That is a good exercise to not be really stressed. And the same thing is when you play jazz, you jam for the musicians. So there's the connection. There is the open-ended skill, there's the reading the environment, there's the making decisions, there's the dealing with your stress, there's the learning by doing kind of thing. And then we might have to have special drills to shoot in the correct way, or play these chords. You might play with your band and you go, I miss these chords, I go home and I practice. But it should be in that direction. You should look at the big skill and practice the big skill and have fun with the big skill and be motivated to do the big skill. And then you go back and do the little tinkering with those movements. And there is no perfect movements. We know this from professional athletes and musicians and other people who do motor skill movements. They don't do the same thing twice. There is a variation in movement, and that variation comes from being exposed to a lot of different situations.
I'm thinking one difference that we might consider from the athlete, not sporting person, athlete is the term, musician, and then police and possibly military. Those last guys there are crucial societal functions that are, and possibly you won't kill anyone if you play the wrong chord. You won't kill anyone if you, maybe not even if you shoot a football in the head, but you might, but like shooting a gun is probably on a whole other level. So I can imagine the stress being possibly even higher.
You have the stress of including somebody, being included from your group. You have the stress of performing poorly. You have the stress of actually harming somebody else or getting harmed yourself. So you have more stressors going into that situation. Of course.
So during this specific project, was it that the authorities handling the shooting exercises, they realized this isn't working properly, we need some academics to do some consulting?
I wish it was like that. Now this is a couple of year old research project, and I don't know what happened since with the police academy and the military, and they might have reformed their way of training. But this was something that came from certain instructors within the police academy that said, well, we're probably doing this wrong, but we're not really listened to by the police force or the higher ups, who have very standardized a strict way of training for shooting. And of course, how much resources should you spend in the police academy of training for something that you probably won't experience in your life? So of course there's an economic or practical aspects of this. Most police officers never draw their gun; they don't shoot their gun, and we should be really glad for that. But when it happened, we need them to perform really, really well, because the consequences of them not performing really well is really bad, not only for the society but for the individuals who are police officers. They need to be taken care of because, as you say, they have a crucial role in society. And if we want them to, if we run this way, we want them to run the other way. We want them to go into a school if there's a school shooting, for example. We want them to be comfortable, or maybe not comfortable, but we want them to be competent in those situations.
Yes, I agree. So, just another brief music comparison. I played a gig yesterday, played some guitar, and the final chord, which is the most important because the audience will remember it, was supposed to be like a jazzy C13 chord, advanced shit with a thumb over the neck, and I played C13 with a C sharp in the bass. That's like the worst thing ever. However, I would like to say that there were no societal consequences from that. If I was a police officer and accidentally fired a gun, it's on such a totally different level. So I totally get why why they called in such a competent academic to fix their problems, etc., etc. It's totally reasonable to consider these things. In my opinion, you might disagree.
Well, I think this is important. There's a lot of things that are important and a lot of important research about a lot of things. This is my niche and contribution to society, I guess. Okay,
another thing that's important is time, and we're running out of it. Briefly, but I always want to ask this question. So in in-depth conversations, we try to consider university as a part of society, which it is, but also the connections between them and how university can cooperate with the rest of society. How do you think that's going currently? What's the role of the university? Could it improve? Could it be? Is it a problem with all the fake news and people don't believe experts anymore? Some brief comments on that. It's a huge question, but I'm very curious.
It's a huge question. Yeah, I think we have an important role in society. We need to be active in the debate. We need to have an environment where we can be active in the debate. We didn't choose to be media personalities. We should be treated as researchers with the respect that human beings deserve, that say something that they think is important. What scares me is when academics say something that is based on research and they are not believed by society in large or politicians. Climate change denial is a thing now. I don't really deal with that, but in my field, if we were to listen to the scientists, I think more children would be into sports. We would have better practices for children. We know that a lot of children are sedentary. They sit at home, play video games. There's nothing really wrong with video games as long as you don't play them all the time. There would be a lot of health benefit. There would be a lot of social benefits if children would like to be involved in sports more.
Yeah.
So from my own perspective, I think, and I tell my students in my sports psychology class, the best thing you can do with this information, with this knowledge and skills, is go out and provide better practices for youth or children, or if you're dealing with adults, to make their experience of physical activity a more meaningful activity. So from what we do, what we teach, what we do research about, should somehow end up in the public knowledge and create a better society. And I actually think we're doing that. So I'm quite positive and I'm quite happy about the students who are here and really competent. So
I'm super happy to hear that, actually. Ending on a positive note. Awesome. So thank you very much, Simon Granér, for visiting In-Depth Conversations.